working.
Have another one, Christy.
Don't tempt me.
That's nice, you got a napkin. It's like having a picnic. These meetings were by special request. And this one, Eleni wanted to know about free will and the blueprint. And Swanee wants to know about dying. I might save dying till the next one, I think. I'd quite like to prepare dying. But last time we completely ad-libbed, so I just waited for questions to come along. And I realised this time I needed to do just a little sort of ground explanation. Or often a question comes along and I sort of think we haven't done the groundwork for that question. When you do the groundwork, then the question sort of answers itself. So, also, anything I say, don't believe it if it doesn't resonate with your own experience. This is sort of what I've discovered on my particular journey, and it's made life, my reaction to life, radically different. And I so wish I'd known what I know now when I was a teenager and when I was in my 20s, because the knowledge even I was studying here then was very, very different from the way it appears now. But don't believe it. If it doesn't resonate with you, then that's fine, that's not for you. And you'll come up with your own formulation of it. But first I just want to explain just a little bit in terms of, in most esoteric traditions they have what's known as absolute and relative knowledge. And when someone first starts out with a way, as it's called, or a system, or whatever it is, a method, you normally present them with relative knowledge. And relative knowledge is taking you from where you are. So if you're in life and you're having a tough time, for example, and you want to access the great stillness, then you point someone in the direction of the great stillness. You say it's here, you sort of point it out. And so relative knowledge is what I call bottom up, and it's looking at everything from the point of view of the separate self. So I'm a separate Philip, and I exist in a world of multiplicity from this point of view. And ever since I've been born and been doing Philip things, I've been trying to find my way along this life path, and lovely things have happened and really horrible things have happened. And it's like I'm sort of working my way through it, and I'm working my way towards something. So relative knowledge is called relative because it's relative. It's relative to you thinking yourself as a separate entity. So starting off, you normally get presented with relative knowledge. An example of that is you're told that behind your thoughts and feelings is the great stillness, and you're shown how to access that. So things we teach here, like turning and meditating, are all about accessing the great stillness. So that's bottom up, from the point of view of a separate self. Top down is what they call absolute knowledge, particularly in Buddhism. Absolute knowledge is from the point of view of the oneness. So, from the point of view of the oneness, everything is the oneness. There is no separation. So when you look you might call the eye of consciousness, there's no separate world of multiplicity, there's no other people, there's just a great vast ocean of oneness. So wherever you look, you're seeing yourself. And that's the symbolism when you bow across the skin in the Macabre. You're acknowledging the oneness in the other person. The oneness in you looks in the eyes of the other and sees the oneness. So that's absolute knowledge. So from this point of view, everything is the absolute. So it's almost answered the free will question already. Everything from this point of view is the unfolding of the absolute. There's nothing separate. From this point of view, relative knowledge, it appears that you're separate. It appears you can act on things. It appears you can change things. It appears you can make decisions. And from that point of view, that's true. I'll lift my arm up, I put it down. I suddenly decided to do that. So from the point of view of separateness, that's how it is. So it's like you're looking at the same phenomena from two entirely different views. In Advaita, they call the two stages Anvaya and Vyatirekya. That's exactly the same as absolute and relative. They call it knowledge for the purposes of training. So when you're training someone, you first of all, you give them the relative knowledge that suits for the purpose of training. And there's all sorts of concepts within the esoteric traditions which relate to knowledge for the purposes of training. And one of those, for example, is the law of karma, the law of cause and effect. Because cause and effect implies that there's a separate entity to create a cause, which then has an effect. So that's cause and effect. From this point of view, absolute knowledge, there's no separate entity to create causes and have effects, because everything is perceived as the unfolding of the oneness. So that's a sort of basic bit of background information on that. And then the way I go at it is just, the nearest thing to me is watching my own life unfold. And it's like life is this sort of learning curve where everything teaches you things. And this is just the way it's appeared to me, is, and I'm sort of looking at the free will thing here. And normally when I do meetings, when I do the Philosophy of the Cosmic Dance intro meetings, I tiptoe around the outside of some questions, because I'm aware I'm trying to get the feel of the group and how far I can go to the absolute perspective and how much I need to keep it in the relative perspective. What I'm dying to do all the time is jump in here, but I sometimes have to edge into there gently, or I sometimes get explosions and the group falls apart, so I have to do it quite sensitively and gently. But what I'm longing to do is to go completely absolute. So I'll get there, but I might still do it in easy stages. So I'm doing it in a stage by telling you now roughly how I came to it. So when I was sort of teenager and in my 20s, the doctrine here was that basically life was mechanical, and somewhere over there, up there somewhere, was a big sort of absolute consciousness which you were striving towards. And if you did things wrong, then your things would go wrong and you'd mess everything up. So you had to sort of weave your way through life, trying to make the right decision all the time. And there was a lot of blame and a lot of guilt, and it was a viewpoint which for me eventually just completely and absolutely fell away. So that was a sort of model of doership. It was a sort of esoteric model because somewhere you could come under what were called higher influences and things might go right, but if not you might get caught up in an accident and you're in a right old pickle. So I started sort of noticing just small things. I noticed fairly early on that life was what I called a multi-dimensional cosmic jigsaw puzzle, that somehow life seemed to unfold in spite of me rather than because of me, and everything in some peculiar way seemed to slot in like a jigsaw. It was like people would appear in my life and play a role when they were needed, and then they'd disappear, which I'd be upset about, but then the next person or thing would suddenly appear in its place, which was like the next thing. And it did give me this very strong feeling that the whole of life was, my life was actually nothing to do with me as a separate entity. It was just like, it was all just happening, and I wasn't even really making any decisions. And then quite often at night I used to dream things before they happened. So I'd dream whole sort of scenes, and then the next day that scene I'd suddenly witness what I'd dreamt, and I thought, how can that be there? How could I dream it the night before and it's still there, and it's happened exactly like that, and nothing from outside has come in and messed it up? And then another time someone had a dream about someone I met. They had the dream about 6 months before the actual thing happened, and they described it in the dream, what had happened, and then I suddenly found 6 months later I was acting out that exact dream, and that again puzzled me. I thought, how can that have already been there, and how could other people, all these accidents and mistakes, not come in and messed it up? And then another time, it was the night before the worst day of my life, I had a vivid dream which was the whole framework of my life spread out. It was like a sort of image of a ladder, and it had different stages on it. And since then it's all unfolded just like in the dream, so I always sort of refer back to that. And if life is sort of falling apart, I think, no, hang on, it's not meant to be doing that. And then it always sort of miraculously pulls itself back together again. So the way I'm looking at it slightly relatively here is, it's like I'm going along this path, and it's so fantastically mapped out. Looking at it from a distance, from having gone a fair way down it, it's like this immaculate drama which I could never have remotely composed myself. And there have been all these times when I've gone up little sort of side alleys. I've thought, for instance, very often, I really want a romance with that person, and I've gone up that sort of alley, and then it's come to a dead stop, it's ended, and it's like I've been just sort of shoved gently back onto my path again, and I go off up that avenue, and then you get that closes. So it's like it's impossible to make a mistake. And going up little blind alleys aren't actually deviations from the path, they're all just a part of the path, they're all things that show you where your particular direction is. And what all that's done for me is it's given me what I call a trust in the process of life. So it's a trust in whatever's happening. it's all a part of it. It's not some terrible mistake where someone's come in and messed it all up. There have been some pretty horrendous things, but again, looking back, even things like intense illness have been part of the things which have opened me up and made me softer and made me more empathetic. So I say it's like the whole of life is there. Now when you have that attitude, your desire to push and pull it starts to diminish. It's not like action doesn't arise. Action and passion still arises very strongly. And if your particular movie requires you to be an activist and take great action, then that action will arise within you. It comes through from here, and you'll suddenly find you're acting the act you have to do within the great conscious movie. But the more you assimilate the idea that it's not you as a separate self who's acting, the more it appears that you're witnessing a perfectly composed movie. And the more that happens, the more what I call beingness starts to arise of itself. So what we call separate self, what some people call ego, diminishes, and what I call beingness or I amness just comes. It's always there. It was never not there. It was just there was a focus on this. But with the letting go of the feeling that you as a separate entity are doing it all, then this great sense of beingness starts to emerge in its place. Life carries on just the same. You still have big traumas, you still get ill, you still fall in love. All of that just carries on. But behind it is a greater awareness of what's always been there, which you might call just the thing behind your eyes, which is your basic sense of aliveness. And with that, you're no longer seeking a miraculous spiritual experience, because you notice that day-to-day life, just as it is the miraculous experience. And there's one bit where Joseph Campbell puts it well. This is Joseph Campbell, he was an American mythologist who taught at Sarah Lawrence College in New York. And when you saw him, he had this amazing, I can't describe it, he had exactly the same look that Dr. Rolls had. It was like this really sort of kind beingness coming out of his eyes. And he says, that's right, Schopenhauer, in his splendid essay called On an Apparent Intention in the Fate of the Individual, points out that when you reach an advanced age and look back over your lifetime, it can seem to have had a consistent order and plan, as though composed by some novelist. Events that when they occurred had seemed accidental and of little moment, turn out to have been indispensable factors in the composition of a consistent plot. So who composed that plot? Schopenhauer suggests that just as your dreams are composed by an aspect of yourself of which your consciousness is unaware, so too your whole life is composed by the will within you. And just as people whom you will have met apparently by mere chance became leading agents in the structuring of your life, so too will you have served unknowingly as an agent, giving meaning to the lives of others. The whole thing gears together like one big symphony, with everything unconsciously structuring everything else. And Schopenhauer concludes that it is as though our lives were the features of the one great dream of a single dreamer, in which all the dream characters dream too, so that everything links to everything else, moved by the one will to life, which is the universal will in nature. It's a magnificent idea, an idea that appears in India in the mythic image of the net of Indra, which is a net of gems, where at every crossing of one thread over another there is a gem reflecting all the other reflective gems. Everything arises in mutual relation to everything else, so you can't blame anybody for anything. It is even as though there were a single intention behind it all, which always makes some kind of sense, though none of us knows what that sense might be, or has lived the life that he quite intended. Okay, that's my bit.
I come from a similar sort of standpoint to you, but my conundrum with it always is it's great in the first world sort of sense, but how does the sort of developing world fit into this? If they're in such crappy times, then sort of it's easy to say everything's meant to be and so on. It is how it is when your life is never that terrible. But if your whole life is just in a terrible environment and state, how can that really be unless then sort of, why would you be brought just to have a crappy life?
I think it's difficult to comment on someone else's experience without having that experience yourself. I remember my sister used to work with Mother Teresa in Calcutta, and she said the people she met there in poverty were often incredibly happy and pitied us in our wealth, apparent wealth, who always seem so unhappy. So I think it's very difficult to take a concept unless it's actually your direct experience and you know what's happening. And also, within the drama of life, the sort of ultimate act of despair, I guess, is suicide. Are there more suicides in the third world than in the developed world? I don't know the statistics, but I would doubt it. I think suffering is suffering wherever it happens, and I think it's difficult to say that person's suffering is greater than that person's because they live there and that person lives there. Often, for instance, the worst grief, I'm told, is the death of a child, and that grief can happen wherever you live. There was, in my last Conscious TV appearance, the illness one, he asked me about Viktor Frankl, who wrote the lovely book called Man's Search for Meaning, which Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist who got, he was a Jewish psychiatrist in Germany, and he got put into Auschwitz. And So, as a psychiatrist, he was able to observe the whole process of suffering, and he said, in Auschwitz, where people were sort of seeing their whole families murdered in front of them, some people went under in the experience, and some people seemed to become radiant and transparent. They sort of almost grew out of it despite the hatred around them. And he said it all depended on an individual's capacity to imbue the experience with some sort of meaning. But at the end of the day, suffering is suffering. Anyone else? My interest is always, very often it's suffering which becomes intolerable, and then it forces you to try and find that thing at everyone's centre which is beyond suffering. Often if life is too cushy, there's no necessity to access the thing which is always beyond suffering. So it's difficult. That's why, again, in my little life story, why for me the whole concept of karma and punishment collapsed. Because when I was having a really tough time, particularly through illness, I noticed that on one level I was also gaining a whole lot. I was learning these amazing things which I wouldn't have learned if that hadn't come along. So then I thought, how can, because some New Age healers were telling me this is all bad karma, but I thought, no, it can't be bad karma because I'm gaining from it, so it's a gift rather than a punishment. So it might be more of a punishment to give me a great big house and plush furnishing. Anyone else?
Just thinking about, say if you leave from the point of view of the oneness, and you kind of assume that, you kind of let life guide you, and just learn from it, and kind of stay within oneness, then next question is, what's the whole point of it? Stay in oneness. Where does it lead to?
It doesn't lead anywhere. There's nowhere for it to lead to. You have to sort of go back to the basic model again. And again, don't believe anything I say. So why have a dance of creation? Why have a drama? That's the basic question. Is why? Why is there this great movie? And we discussed it a bit last week where you weren't here, where I used a Rumi metaphor, where Rumi says how the one mind wants to have a game of checkers or backgammon or whatever it is, and as there's just one of it, there's no one. You've got no one to play with. And Ken Wilber uses the analogy: it's no fun having dinner alone. So you want someone to have dinner with on a cosmic scale. So in the game of checkers, you want an opponent to play with. So one mind makes its move, then it has, because there's only one of it, there's nothing else, it has to run round the other side of the board and make its move. But it can't make the move as the one mind, because it would know what it's going to do and there's no game. So if you go around the other side of the board, your memory has to be erased that you're the one mind. So you make the move in complete forgetfulness that you're actually this side of the board as well. And then the one mind comes back round and then it remembers who it is and makes the other move. So from the point of view of that Rumi metaphor, all of us are the one mind playing the great drama of life, which is a dance just for the sake of the dance, in complete forgetfulness of who we really are. So all of us are oneness, looking out through all of our eyes, behind our thinking, behind our temporal identity, is exactly the same oneness, the same thing looking out. It's not that you've got a separate oneness looking out. Your oneness is identical to my oneness and Amir's oneness and Emma Brown's oneness. So from that point of view, there is no purpose, it's not leading anywhere, it's a dance. Why do we dance? Why do we turn in the macabre? We dance for the dance. Why do I paint pictures? Apart from earning my living, I just love doing it. It's just pure enjoyment. So it's like the whole universe, the whole manifestation is oneness dancing, is the absolute dancing for the dance. And that was also the image of the dance of Shiva up there, which we discussed earlier. Does that make any sense? You're not going to get a really sort of logical answer to this one, but that's quite a good metaphorical answer, the dance of Shiva. And the whole macabre is a symbol of that dance, because the shake is the great stillness, which we all are, and the dancers are all a manifest creation in time and space, which has a beginning, it has a middle, and it has an end, and then it dies back, and then later on it all starts again.
In the film world.
In the film world?
Yes. The script is A to Z. The script is like everything. But here we are, like a group of people who want to film this script with the director, script writer, the rest of the group. And I totally agree the script is everything. It's primordial, it's like the essence of everything. But as you are making the decision to film it, there are parameters that may change. The story, the essence of the story, does not change. There might be decisions taken along the way that do not change the script, but maybe change some aesthetics. For instance, like the photography here, we took the decision to make more green than more orange. It doesn't change the story, but aesthetically, we have a different photography. Like there are things that might change as you're filming along. The script stays the same. So my question is, if we see the blueprint as a script, a pre-written script that we're all here to play out, are there any parameters that do not change the story, but may be open for us as we play the script along?
My experience, I'm just talking completely personally here, from knowing certain things before they happened, was it wasn't like I was shown it so I could change it. I was shown it so I would be aware and I would know it. So it was often when I was going to, something quite difficult was going to happen, and I'd have a complete picture of it in advance, and it still happened just as seen, but it just gave me, it was like the one mind, in this case I'm saying he's separate, the one mind was giving me a little preview, just to sort of reassure me and make it easier. And in the near-death experience, the NDE, when people die, they often get a huge preview of what's going to happen later in life. And again, it's not something that you as a separate entity can change. I can't fully answer that question because I don't fully have all the answers, and it might be different for you. The way I see it, and my understanding of it is there's no one separate to alter it. So if we go back, the analogy I used last week was Rumi's famous Mathnavi story of the pen writing on the paper with the ants, and one ant saying, isn't it wonderful the pen can do this writing? Another ant says, no, it's not the pen, it's the hand that holds the pen. And another ant says, no, it's not the hand, it's the arm that moves the hand. And so on, they go back and back until the wise ant says, no, the movement is caused by none of these things. The movement is caused by the universal spirit that gives movement to all things. And that's what Rumi calls the soul of the soul of the soul. So it's jumping back and not stopping there, not stopping there, and not stopping there. From this perspective, every single motivation arises from the same source. So there isn't an Eleni motivation versus a Philip motivation. It's all coming from exactly the same place. So in terms of us having a script and then individually changing it, it's a model I can't get my head round, because there isn't individual changing, because every motivation is coming out of the same source of oneness. So that's how I would put it. But what do I know? But for me it's just I'm witnessing an immaculate drama, and I've tried so hard to mess it up, and so far I haven't managed to, I don't think. It just goes on and on, unfolding. And the other amazing thing, I forgot this bit, is again, going back to my little movie, is often there have been people who don't like me at all, and have done nasty things, including throwing me out of my house and things like that. But again, when I moved on a bit, I've suddenly seen, my God, that pushed me into exactly where I had to be. So the nasty action was coming from the same source. At the time, I thought, no, that's terrible, I mustn't do that, I must fight it, I must change the locks, and so on and so on. But in having to go with it eventually, then it just plonked me 100% where I had to be, and I saw that everything arises from the same source. And that again was another thing which squashed karma on the head, because I thought, no, you're doing something motivated by anger, but it's exactly what I need, and it's putting me exactly where I have to be. So that's why I sort of go back to the multi-dimensional jigsaw puzzle. It's everything but everything seems to slot together. The difficulty, which I'm still learning, is when you suddenly get plonked right in the traumatic situation again, is to trust the process. Everything else it's worked out, I'm still alive, just trust this. Do your best, trust it. Trust the unfolding. Anyone else? I don't want to keep you forever, because it's getting on and some of you have to get home, and next time we'll do dying. Because dying's virtually the same thing really, but I can bring along some really lovely examples of dying. Because as I was discussing with Swanee Brown earlier, nearly everyone is frightened of dying, and yet people fear death and long for enlightenment, but they're both the same thing really. So, but we'll discuss that next time.
Do you know the creation, or say when we are upstairs dancing, we are creating something. Although it's part of something, even though it's meant to be, but yet when you turn, you have these opportunities of making better or not, to let go or not. And those opportunities is the space for creativity. And creativity, I think, it is a big part of it. And all those little spaces where we can be creative in it in some sort of way is when creation happens, which after all is probably...
That's true, but you still have to go back to ask the question, who's being creative? Who is the we which is doing the creation? Who is the I which decides they're going to be creative? Where does that impulse to be creative come from? So you're still slightly taking yourself apart from the oneness and saying, I'm something separate who's deciding to be creative when I'm turning or whatever, rather than acknowledging that every impulse comes from the oneness. So from the relative level, yes, you're deciding to be creative, you're making decisions, you're making things better, in inverted commas. From the absolute level, absolute perspective, again, it's all just the unfolding of oneness. So, what creates separation is claiming what is coming from the oneness as your own. So that's a bit like my motor car deciding where it's going to... I get in it and it decides where it's going to go. It doesn't, because it's the vehicle. And this mind-body is also the vehicle of consciousness. So one of the current theories, which is sort of emerging even in science out of the near-death experience, is that the brain is just... consciousness is universal, and the brain is just like a radio transmitter through which consciousness transmits. So the brain isn't the seat of consciousness. The brain is just, from this point of view, is just the vehicle through which consciousness happens. And then the free will thing, which is very interesting in science, we were discussing with Michael, who's not here, that neuroscience has recently shown that the brain reacts to events. It starts to react a millisecond before the event actually happens, which is fairly staggering if you think about it. So it's like at one level it's all, the whole thing is all there outside of time. So on a practical day-to-day level, you have this knowledge at the back of your mind, and then you go off and you dance your dance. But you can dance for dance in great confidence. You don't have to dance for dance with timidity, thinking you're messing it up, because you're not. Your dance is just perfect within that. So that's a great message it gives, and it gives a great message of trusting the process of your life and how it's turning out. And there's a brilliant Timothy Freak metaphor. Timothy Freak came here once. He's a non-dual teacher, and he uses metaphor of life is like a journey from A to B, and on that journey you're going to have swamps, and you're going to have deserts, and you're going to have open roads and jungles, and everyone does that journey. And sometimes you're on the open road and it's fantastic, and you think, I'm doing really well and I'm really enlightened, and then you suddenly find yourself bogged down in the inevitable swamp, and then it doesn't, you think, no, I'm not quite so enlightened, and then you get back on the open road again, and life just goes on like that. It has all these different sections that you go through, but each of them are always have a beginning and an end each section. So if you get in the swamp, don't worry about it. It will have a limited duration. Then you'll find yourself in the open road. Then you'll find yourself in the jungle with wild animals. I think that might be enough for one night. Then we'll be dying next time. That will be 2 weeks today after the after the practice. Because later on in March I'll be going down to Dorset quite a bit, so I won't always be here on Friday practices, but I'll try and do these when I'm here and when I can, if you want them. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
And as I said, it's Sikhi blessing next Friday. I've already got about 5, I think.
Can you do 6?
6, yeah, I can do 8. So you need to be, I'll just tell you where you need to be, Mauricio.
Yeah.
Next Friday, when you go upstairs to Robe, up there for the Macabre, you need to be up there at 6:55, wearing your whites, which you would normally wear, and your trousers before robing. Put on your hurka and carry your sikhi, and I'll call you all into the blue room.
6:45.
6. I'll call you in at 7, so you need to be there before 7.
So it's an open to the public one next Friday.
Next Friday's a guest macabre.
Okay. So I know someone that might want to come.
Okay, good. Goody.